Hello everyone and welcome back. Today we'll be transforming this into this. So let's not waste any time and let's go. So first, I like to have some image lighting, which is using HDRs. You can get HDRs free from HDRI Haven, or there's a lot of other sites, but I use the Haven one, and the images are for free. So you can set it up here in the world menu, and on the color, this yellow bubble, you press and use environment texture, and now just open it from your computer. Choose your HDR depending from what you want to achieve with the view. I'm gonna go to something similar we seen in the beginning. Because the scene was dark, I chose to use a pretty dark HDRI. As you can see, if we press the rendering tab, now you can see my HDR. And it's an evening with some traffic lights, and we get this atmospheric view. Now we can lower the strength in here or add more if you want, and it brings pretty realistic and nice lighting already. But I want to create story on my own. That's why I going to have this on very low value, but for now I will have it for 1 just to see what's happening in the background. For making, if you're having a background plain, I recommend adding some texture to it, and it's very easy. So what you do is add some sort of, by pressing Shift A, maybe let me turn on my screencast keys. So by pressing Shift A, just like in the 3D view, you can add some nodes, and in a texture you can choose any texture which you want. I usually choose noise, and in the converter I add color ramp. This way I have all the choice I will need. You can use color to the factor or even factor to the factor. I really don't find too much difference in that. Just the color will have a variation, but this color ramp will delete it. And in a color ramp, I choose 2 colors which I want my background to have. So I will just reselect which I had already. You change these colors by selecting these parts. Okay, and picking my color picker and just picking the color from there. It actually seems a bit different. It should be fine. Now what I do, turn on it in the base, and the next step will require you to have in edit mode preference add-ons to turn on Node Wrangler. This way you can hold Ctrl Shift and press on one of your nodes, and you will see what's happening with the node. So as you can see, I had my scale lower. You can add more detail. The texture will be more detailed. Usually it doesn't need, because the noise is just a very simple map. You can lower or higher the scale, depends from what you need, but you will have some nice variation. You can play with these. A color ramp to change the look, but I like the default one. It can distort the noise to have some nice effect. I can add a small distortion which makes it look a bit more interesting, and that's enough for this one. Now for these items I do literally the same thing. The only different thing is I use 2 textures, but this is basically the same. And just in the color I add mix RGB and connect both of them, and just turn it in the base like this. Now hue saturation We'll look a bit later what it is, but basically that's what I get from noise. It's almost the same as just having a noise. It just adds a little bit of the texture. And the hue saturation, you can change the color by selecting the hue. So I have it on 6, and this will make a color a bit rougher, more popping. That's basically it. And just connect it to the color and Ctrl-Shift, click on your last node, and this is how it's going to be looking. Now for the base, I didn't really add anything. Don't mind these things, they don't do much. It's just making a square into the circle, but that's basically it. It doesn't do anything more. This one doesn't do anything. And this is just a gradient texture spherical, and that's it. If you want to take a look, you can stop the video and copy this, but you can just model a circle and that's going to be enough. Okay, so we have a nice base, and now we'll start playing with the color. But before we do, I will set my HDR to lower strength and go in my rendering options. And at the bottom, there's a color management, and filmic is set to default, but I never really like the results of filmic, so I always change it into the standard. And on a look, I change it to high contrast or medium high contrast. Very high contrast is good, but sometimes it burns too much. And in the end, in the compositor, we'll still add a bit more contrast, so we shouldn't overkill with it. And we have something looking like this. So this is a nice base. What we can do is turn on ambient bloom, screen space reflection. Don't forget to turn on refraction and screen space reflection. Motion blur is not needed because we are not animating it. Everything else is fine. Don't forget soft shadows if it's turned off. Okay, so now we should start setting up our lights. Let me delete this camera. So there are only two types of lights I really use: area and a spot. Sometimes I use point. Let's say this weapon, her crossbow, is not actually emitting any light because in EEVEE emissive materials don't really emit light. So what you can do is use point lamp, take the color and copy that blue shade, and now your weapon going to emit the light on your character. If you want to see this result better, you can turn off your HDR and you can see that this is only the light. I forgot to turn back principal shader on our background, so now you can actually see what's happening from this light. Okay, let's turn back the HDR. You can add more or less, depends. And the first light I create is the light I call the story, but it's just the main light. For this, I'm gonna be using spotlight. And I'm using the spotlight just because I want the light which has a direction. Of course, area light does have a direction too. But with the spotlight, it's easier to create a ray lighting, which I'm going to show you. So I'm gonna set up that middle line on her, and the cone is too big, so you can lower the cone size. I think 25% will be enough. Now for the angle which I'm looking is just depending on how I want the light to fall. I know her face is looking up somewhere in there, so I want the light to be falling from the same positions she's looking, a bit different, not exactly the same, but very closely to it. And don't forget to watch on that line. So I set up her line to go to the middle of her head, and now we cannot really see anything what this light does. And because I want this light to tell the story, it's gonna be my main lighting, and it's gonna have a really high power. You can set up your main lighting different way, like this. It depends on what you need. And because I want this light to drive my composition, I'm gonna have a really high power on it. So I'm gonna start with 1000. And because the light is very far away from the character, you can see it doesn't really emit a lot. So I'm actually gonna use 3500. And you can see it's having a big effect. It's very visible. Now, in the beginning, we saw that this light is not actually very united. So what I'm gonna to do is add plane and select the plane, go into edit mode. I'm gonna drag it a bit higher so it's not in the way. Right click. I'm going to subdivide it 3 times. Use face selection and select random faces. You can check select. It's okay in every way. And when you finish, just delete the faces. And we'll have something like this. What I usually like to do is subdivide it again. And on the vertices selection, I use smooth vertices to get them a bit more spherical. You can add a subdivision surface so they will be oval. And I make it smaller. Block the light at the beginning. You can see light reflecting from it. I can even use 2 or 3 to make it more interesting. At some point it starts blocking way too much, so you can delete few more and make your light having some rays. It depending how much you have closed. I have way too much closed, so we cannot see. But just select randomly and delete it. Select randomly, delete it. I still don't see a lot of lighting on her face, which is a bit of the problem. So I'm gonna delete more, and we can already see some effect happening on her face. Her hair. And this lighting has more of the story now. I feel like the background is very empty and doesn't have a lot of information, so I like to add emission. And in this concept, she was having some leaves. So I was trying to create lotus leaves by creating plane, dragging it a bit higher, and going to top view to shape. We can go into solid mode. And shape the leaf, so you can do it the way you want. And it doesn't have to be leaf. It can be butterflies, it can be just small spheres, and anything you can think of. So this is a really quick representation of the leaf. I usually would put a bit more work into it, but just for showing case, this is going to work. Of course, again, you can use anything you want. It can be spheres, balls, cubes. You can create wings for butterflies. What I'm gonna do is extrude it. I will apply my mirror modifier in the object mode and go back edit mode and scale it down. Now, when you're done modeling the leaf, make sure you have it in the center. So what I'm going to do is first go into object, set origin and geometry to origin. And this way it will be a middle if your origin was in the middle. But if you have it just move like this, and you can see the orange circle is on your object, you can just press Alt and J and it will center it in the middle. Now we will create an emitter. An emitter can be created from any of these objects. I'll be using UV sphere. I'll go into edit mode, scale it on Z axis just to make it like a pancake, and scale it to make it a bit bigger. I'll position it behind the character because I want the leaves only to fall behind her and not in front of her. I'll position it pretty high, and now you can go back into object mode, go into particle properties, press plus, and in the rendering options I'll use object, and in the instance object I will choose my leaf. So now you can save your scene, don't forget to do that. I'll press play and you can see something is happening, but the leaves are very small because the scale in here is by default set to very small size. So I'll set it to 1 and it will replicate the size of our leaf completely. So maybe this leaf is a bit too big, so I'll actually drop it to 0.5 and it can have a scale randomness. So you can see some of them will be big and some of them will be small. Now probably there won't be a very small leaf, so I will only have it in the middle. So we have everything in the middle, 0.5 and 0.5. Now they're only falling straight down, which is the problem because it's not really how it should be. So in the rotation options, just choose randomize. I will play it again. And you can see all leaves falling down randomly. Now before we can see it in the rendering view, we'll have to set it up the material. So for the leaf material, I do very simple material. I'll add a new. And in here, I will just use emission. And it depends what kind of color you want. I want this pink, nice color. Again, you can do a bit higher and add more detail by using any of the textures again. And again, color ramp. Basically, you do use these two maps for making any difference in the mesh. And don't forget to change the colors. Now we didn't use totally black color. Use just a bit of different shade. And we have our emission pedals set. You can make them emit more. And now it looks cool and cute. By playing with the emitter options, you can add more or less. You can make the number higher. This way it's very easy to have more pedals falling. But now basically your whole background will be very colorful. I actually feel like this needs subdivision surface. Now be careful because this is definitely a heavy operation for your computer, even if those are just instances. Play with the strength. And you can hide your emitter now, or just make it in the camera properties, make it not renderable. Let's set up our camera. 0 to go into camera view, and view camera to view. Now I press N again, and by moving my 3D view, my camera view changes. And you can set up your camera. I usually like to change the perspective to 40, 35, 45. So I set up my view. And let's say this is going to work. Now we have our background. We have our story light. Maybe I will delete whole pack as I still feel I'm blocking way too much light. It takes, but we can see that line in the middle. I have it on the face, so I tried to open up that area so we have some light falling straight down on her face as well. You can add a bit more strength if you want to the light. I probably wouldn't go too much over this. You can see the cone if you want. You can use contact shadows. I actually like using contact shadows. You can change few settings, but these are very confusing, so I don't play too much with it. And at this point we only have one light, which is the story driven light, and the story is she's looking at the sky and something is blocking the light, maybe trees, because we have leaves falling, and the story light is not enough. Just let me turn off this cone. Go into camera view. So if we look, let me just zoom into the camera closer. If we look at the character, it blends in with the background and it's not looking too interesting. So I want to make my character pop out of the background and be very visible. What I'm gonna do is add light, area light, move it a bit higher. Now I don't really like using shape square. I usually use Eclipse or Disk. I will be using Eclipse this time because if I don't like to have my popping out lighting to be a very big radius, I like them to be smaller. Don't forget to change the size in here. So I will show you what I'll do with the shape, but now let's just move it into the back. You can position it many ways. I will actually copy this light, so it doesn't matter too much of the position right now. But what I'm gonna do is increase the E-axis, and the light will shine through whole character size now, while not being too big. I want that the color will be very similar to the leaves, so I'll pick from the leaves. Actually, the emitter is pure white, so I want something a bit off the side. Maybe this is a bit too much, so I'll move accordingly. Now, if we go to the camera view, let's hide everything so we can see only how it's going to look. I don't really see anything happening, so I'll start adding some light, and you can see her sides starting to pop out. I'll add a bit more. And you can see it looks so much better now. It looks like the background is coloring her, shining some light. So I'm actually gonna use 250 because I'm going to add few of these lights. Let's get back so we can see where is our light. And you can play with the position as well. How much of the hair you want to be lighted. How much side of her face. Now when I move the camera, the light to the side, you can see that on her arms the light disappeared. So I'll move it a bit back, and I will actually duplicate the light 2 times. Again, don't overdo it, but I want her to pop out a lot. And you can see her popping out now from the background. On her weapon, on her arms, on her side. I actually feel like this light is a bit too weak, because now the background is overpowering, so I'm gonna increase by 1000. And usually if you have your light falling down in the back, you can see that some of the details in here is pure black, and we need some light to not lose all of these details. Actually, this light is helping a bit, because if you press the 0, you can see a lot of the details disappear. But if you add 10, you can see some more. But I will add another area light, position it in the front of the side. You can actually put it in here with your, it doesn't matter, but as you can see, my legs are positioned opposite from her body, so the body is shined from that light and the legs are rotated looking in that way. And I want to have details in this place, that's why I'm positioning my light this way. Again, I use disks or eclipses, and because I don't want to lose these details. And for this light, I usually add more size, 2, 3, and just turn off every single other light. and play with this light a little bit. So I really don't want this light to add a lot, just to start seeing some details in here, and that's enough. That's what we having. Can actually add some more color if you want to your light, but be careful, because if you change the color of your story light, it's gonna change whole colors of the character. But if you see, if I add a bit more orangeness, her skin color changes completely. So be careful how much you change it. You can keep it on a neutral white so it doesn't change any colors. And I usually like to add some mist, some smoke in the background, which is this. And let me just show you how I do it. So basically you're just going to create a cube. I have this cube blocking everything, and inside of it we have a character. And this cube has a very simple nodes. Let me zoom in. Actually, let me zoom in this way. And as you can see, in shader you add principal volume, again color ramp, again noise. And if you have a node wrangler, by selecting your noise texture and you have node wrangler on, hold Ctrl and press T, and you will get this. So I just change it from the generated to object, and that's it. Now, by connecting color to your density and emission color, and by changing this, and this is going to be white. Let me go back and show you what's happening with the view. As you can see, if I keep it at the white color, it's gonna be very dense. And this color is basically how visible your mesh is going to be. Your mist. So if I make the color darker, the mist is going to start to disappear. I wouldn't overkill with it. That's why I had it somewhere in here, because I only want to have some details. Now we set it up everything just to have details on the character, and our background became invisible. So what you can do is duplicate the light on the character and have it set up into the background. You can even increase the size to cover up whole background. Turn off so I cannot see what's happening, and just turn off, increase the light. You can see this way we can have some details popping off from the background into our character. Now you can change the color. And we have a nice looking scene, nice lighted character. Again, play with the values. But at some point, if you add too much light to your story, too much power, it's going to burn out some of the features. As you can see, the top becoming way too bright. And at this way we can see some of the color variation in our top, which is actually a fabric. As you can see, it has a variation. And I don't want to burn out those details only by adding more and more power to my lamp. Now, we actually have everything set up, but it's not really finished, because for rendering, we'll still be using compositing. But basically, this is it for a rendering video, and I hope you enjoyed this video and you create your own story for the character, and you got the basic understanding of why I'm using these lights and how I set up my scene. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and see you in the next one.